The night sky pulsed with unnatural light, hues of green and silver streaking across the heavens. David Keller, a seasoned soldier burdened by memories of war, stood on the rooftop of his crumbling apartment complex, staring upward. His dog tags clinked softly as he shifted his weight, their metallic jingle swallowed by the growing hum in the air. What had begun as a faint shimmer now burned bright, as if the stars themselves had descended. He didn't believe in omens, but tonight, the universe seemed to have other plans. Miles away, in the cluttered confines of his laboratory, Dr. Elias Grant adjusted his glasses. His computer screens glowed with an avalanche of data, signals captured from the strange lights that had appeared simultaneously across the globe. Each reading defied the natural order, his instruments unable to categorize the phenomena. Elias had devoted his life to unraveling cosmic mysteries, but tonight he felt small, a mere speck on the grand canvas of an unfolding cosmic drama. Static buzzed over radios as the lights above morphed into distinct, glowing shapes. They hovered motionless for a heartbeat before descending. What first appeared as meteorites soon revealed themselves as vast, triangular vessels, their surfaces smooth and gleaming like obsidian under moonlight. The world froze. Television broadcasts interrupted sitcoms and sports games to focus on these silent giants. David received a call from an old comrade stationed at a nearby military base. "They're here, Keller," the voice said, trembling. "Command's preparing a response, but these things are nothing like we've ever seen." He hung up, staring again at the ships now descending over his city. The air seemed heavier, a tangible weight pressing down on him. He knew instinctively that these weren't the kind of visitors who came in peace. The ships hovered low, their sheer size blocking out the horizon. Windows shattered from the deafening, rhythmic thrum emanating from the vessels. Across the city, terrified civilians poured into the streets, their panic cries merging into a chaotic symphony. But there were no announcements, no visible threats, only silence as the alien crafts loomed. Elias, watching a live feed of one of the ships, noticed something peculiar. "They're scanning," he whispered to himself, observing a beam of light sweeping across the cityscape. Not random destruction, not immediate carnage. Precision. David packed his essentials into a tattered military bag. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but something held him back. This was his home, his city. Even as fear gnawed at his resolve, he felt the pull of duty. It didn't take long for the first act of hostility. One of the crafts unleashed an energy pulse, flattening skyscrapers in an instant. David saw it from his rooftop, the shockwave ripping through the city like a scythe. The street below filled with desperate figures scrambling for shelter. He grabbed his rifle, relic of a life he thought he'd left behind, and made his way into the chaos. On the outskirts of the city, Elias packed his research into a hard drive and sprinted to his car. The phone call from his contact at the observatory echoed in his mind. It's not random. They're looking for something. He didn't know what something was, but he had theories. The aliens' behavior didn't align with mindless invasion. They were calculated, focused. David's path intersected with a small group of survivors in an alleyway, huddled behind an overturned delivery truck. Among them was Marcus, a wiry teenager clutching a baseball bat, his eyes wide with fear but lit with defiance. He'd survived the first pulse and had been leading others to relative safety. David admired the kid's guts, though he doubted his bat would hold up against alien tech. "We can't stay here," David said, surveying the sky. He pointed toward the subway entrance a block away. "Underground's our best shot." As the group moved cautiously, the air shifted again. A beam of light swept their direction, locking onto the alley. Without hesitation, David grabbed Marcus and shoved him forward. "Run!" The beam incinerated the truck, sending debris raining down. Marcus stumbled but kept moving, David and the others following closely. They reached the subway entrance as the beam swept over their heads again, missing by inches. The subway tunnels offered a temporary reprieve. The faint sound of the alien ship's hums was dulled underground. In the flickering light of a broken overhead lamp, David took stock of the group. There were 10 of them now, each face etched with exhaustion and terror. "Where's this leading us?" asked a man in a suit, his voice shaky. "Out of the city," David replied curtly. "Or at least away from those things." "Do you think they'll stop?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter than before. The boy's bravado had faded, replaced with the raw fear of someone too young to comprehend the scale of what was happening. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. Above ground, Elias sped toward the city's edge, his mind racing. If the aliens were scanning for something specific, it had to be worth their efforts to annihilate human infrastructure. Could it be tied to his research? He thought of the encoded signals he detected weeks before the lights appeared. He dismissed them as background noise then. Now, they seemed like breadcrumbs leading to a much darker truth. He called David, his voice breathless. "Keller, I need you to meet me." David, still leading the group through the tunnels, frowned. "Not the best time, Grant." "You don't understand," Elias insisted. "I think I know what they're after. And if I'm right, this doesn't end with one city falling. It's the whole planet." David cursed under his breath, but agreed. He'd served with Elias in the military before the scientists pursued academia. They weren't friends exactly, but they trusted each other. As the call ended, a tremor shook the subway tunnel. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and a chilling sound echoed through the darkness. A mechanical growl, alien yet disturbingly alive. "Keep moving," David barked, his grip tightening on his rifle. The group pushed forward, their breath quickening as the sound grew closer. The first contact had turned from awe-inspiring to apocalyptic in mere hours. David knew they were just beginning to understand the scope of the threat. The survival of humanity rested on fragile alliances and desperate gambles, but he also knew one thing: running wasn't enough. At some point, they'd have to fight back. The oppressive silence of the subway tunnel was shattered by a deafening roar. It echoed off the concrete walls, sending shivers down the spines of the group David was leading. Marcus, clutching his baseball bat like a lifeline, turned to David with wide, questioning eyes. David didn't respond. His focus was on the unseen predator behind them. The sound was alien, unnatural, and closer than before. "Move!" David barked, ushering the group forward. They hurried along the uneven tracks, their footsteps splashing in shallow puddles left by years of neglect. The air was thick with dust and the sour tang of fear. David took the rear, his rifle raised, scanning the shadows for movement. His military instincts kicked in, but this was unlike any battlefield he had faced. The enemy wasn't human, and the rules of engagement were unknown. A blinding blue light suddenly filled the tunnel, accompanied by a guttural screech that reverberated through the bones. A monstrous silhouette emerged, its body pulsating with an otherworldly glow. The creature had no discernible face, just a smooth, obsidian surface where a head should have been. Its limbs, elongated and jointless, moved with an unnatural fluidity as it advanced. "Run!" David roared, firing his rifle. The bullet struck the creature's surface, ricocheting harmlessly. It didn't flinch, its glowing core intensifying as if mocking the attack. Panic gripped the group, and they sprinted down the tunnel, tripping over debris in their desperation to escape. Elias's voice crackled over David's radio. "Keller, are you still underground?" David fired another volley, buying time for the others. "Kind of busy, Elias. You need to get topside," Elias said urgently. "I've analyzed their scanning patterns. They're flushing survivors into specific zones." "Zones," David growled, ducking as the creature swiped at him with a limb. The force of the swing splintered the wall behind him. "They're herding us like cattle," Elias continued. "I think they're trying to isolate resistance groups." David didn't have time to argue. "Fine, I'll figure it out." He turned and ran, rejoining the group. The creature's shrill screech echoed behind them, but it didn't give chase. Instead, the blue light receded, leaving only darkness and the group's ragged breathing. Marcus caught up to David. "Why didn't it follow us?" David glanced back, his jaw tightening. "Because it doesn't have to." Above ground, the city was unrecognizable. Towers that had once defined the skyline were reduced to smoldering husks. Streets were littered with debris, abandoned cars, and the bodies of those who hadn't made it to shelter. The alien ships hovered like sentinels, beams of light sweeping through the ruins. Occasionally, the beams would pause, and an area would disintegrate in a flash of white. Elias stood on the roof of a parking garage, surrounded by an assortment of makeshift equipment. His laptop displayed a complex array of data streams, alien symbols interwoven with human calculations. He adjusted a small antenna dish aimed at one of the ships. "Come on, give me something," he muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. A sudden movement on the street below caught his attention. A group of survivors darted between buildings, pursued by one of the glowing creatures. Elias recognized the lead figure, David. Grabbing his radio, Elias shouted, "Keller, northeast corner, parking garage." "I'm here." David looked up, spotting Elias waving from the rooftop. He motioned for the group to follow him, weaving through alleys until they reached the garage. Inside, Elias descended to meet them, his expression grim. "You made it," Elias said, glancing at the exhausted survivors. "Barely," David replied, his tone clipped. "What's the plan?" Elias gestured toward his equipment. "I've been intercepting their signals. These creatures, whatever they are, aren't just attacking. They're harvesting something." "Harvesting what?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Elias hesitated, then said, "Energy signatures. Specific frequencies that align with the human nervous system." David frowned. "You're saying they're feeding on us?" "Not exactly. More like converting us into raw material. Whatever they're building, it's big." The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of the revelation settled over them, suffocating and inescapable. The group fortified themselves in the parking garage, scavenging supplies from abandoned vehicles. David took inventory of their weapons. A few firearms, limited ammunition, and whatever blunt objects they could find. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Elias continued analyzing the alien signals, his frustration mounting. Their communication is layered, almost like a code within a code. "I can't break it." David leaned against a car, watching Elias work. "We need more than guesses, Elias. If we're going to fight back, we need a target." Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. "The ships. They're the command hubs. If we can disrupt their energy fields." A thunderous explosion cut him off. The group rushed to the edge of the garage, peering out at the chaos below. One of the alien ships had descended lower, its beam carving through the ground as if searching for something buried beneath the city. "They're accelerating," Elias said. "Whatever they're building, they're almost done." David's jaw tightened. "Then we hit them now." Under the cover of darkness, the group made their way toward the nearest ship. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the eerie silence. They moved in a loose formation, David taking point with Marcus close behind. Elias carried a makeshift device he cobbled together, a transmitter he hoped would interfere with the alien systems. Reaching the ship's landing zone, they crouched behind a collapsed bus, staring up at the towering vessel. Its surface shimmered with a faint, iridescent light, and a low hum reverberated through the air. "How do we get inside?" Marcus whispered. Elias pointed to a hatch on the ship's underside. "There, but it's heavily shielded." David studied the terrain. "We create a diversion. Draw their attention away long enough for you to plant your device." "I'll go with him," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. David hesitated but nodded. "Stick close to Elias. Don't do anything stupid." He signaled to the others, who began setting up distractions, setting fires, creating noise, anything to pull the aliens' focus. The glowing creatures appeared almost immediately, drawn to the commotion like moths to a flame. Elias and Marcus sprinted toward the hatch, their movements swift and deliberate. Reaching the base of the ship, Elias set to work on the transmitter, his hands trembling as he connected wires and adjusted settings. Marcus stood guard, gripping his bat tightly. The ground shook as one of the creatures approached, its glowing core pulsing with menace. Marcus stepped forward, raising his bat. The creature lunged, and he swung with all his might. The impact reverberated through his arms, but the creature barely staggered. Elias shouted, "Keep it distracted." Marcus dodged another attack, his heart pounding. The creature's movements were faster now, more aggressive. He swung again, this time aiming for its glowing core. The bat shattered on impact, but the creature faltered, its light dimming momentarily. The ruined city skyline loomed ahead, bathed in the crimson glow of the alien ships that hung like malevolent gods above. The survivors trudged through the desolation, their battered forms a testament to the horrors they had endured. David led the way, his rifle slung across his back, a steely determination in his eyes. Marcus followed close behind, his makeshift weapon replaced by a salvaged plasma blade from one of the fallen creatures. Elias trailed slightly, clutching his laptop and transmitter, his mind racing with calculations. "Elias," David called over his shoulder. "What's our window?" Elias glanced at his screen, the glow of alien symbols reflected on his face. If the energy patterns hold, the central hub will release a pulse in less than 2 hours. If we don't disable it by then, well, you've seen what happens. They all had. The annihilation of the neighboring city was still etched into their memories. A blinding pulse, and then nothing but silence and ash. David didn't need further motivation. He tightened his grip on the straps of his pack and picked up the pace. Their target was the largest alien ship hovering above the heart of the city. Unlike the others, it emitted a continuous beam of energy into the ground, drilling deep into the earth. Elias had theorized that this was the central hub, the control vessel for the entire invasion. Destroying it would sever the network connecting the alien forces, leaving them disorganized and vulnerable. Almost there, David muttered as they approached a crumbling skyscraper. The structure leaned precariously, its upper floors sheared off by an earlier attack. They ducked inside, using the shadows to mask their movements. Marcus eyed the towering ship through a jagged hole in the building. "How are we supposed to get up there?" "It's like a fortress." Elias smirked despite the tension. "I have a plan. You're not going to like it." David arched an eyebrow. "We haven't liked any of your plans so far. Keep talking." Elias pointed to a cluster of alien machinery stationed near the ship's base. "That's a transport pod. It's how they move supplies to the hub. If I can reprogram it, we can hitch a ride straight to the command center." Marcus groaned. "And what happens when we get there?" "Throw rocks at them." David cut him off. "We'll figure it out. We always do." Reaching the transport pod was a calculated risk. The area was crawling with patrol units, those glowing, formless creatures that seemed to glide rather than walk. David signaled for the group to split up, using the wreckage for cover. Every step felt like a lifetime, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. At the pod, Elias set to work immediately. His fingers flew over the alien console, a mix of trial, error, and intuition guiding him. Marcus stood guard, his plasma blade humming faintly as he scanned the surroundings. David whispered into his radio, "Elias, how much longer?" Elias frowned. "I'm working with alien tech here. Ask me again in 5 minutes." "We don't have 5 minutes," Marcus muttered, pointing toward an approaching patrol unit. David gritted his teeth. "Elias now." The console emitted a chime, and the pod's hatch opened with a hiss. "Got it," Elias exclaimed. "Inside now," David ordered. They piled into the pod as the patrol unit closed in. The hatch sealed just as the creature reached them, its glowing limbs slamming against the metal. Elias activated the pod, and it lurched upward, propelled by an invisible force. Inside, the group caught their breath. Marcus leaned against the wall, his hands trembling. "This better work." "It will," Elias said, more to himself than anyone else. The pod docked with a resonant clang, the hatch opening to reveal the interior of the alien command center. The walls pulsed with a faint blue light, veins of energy running through the structure like a living organism. The air was thick and humid, the hum of machinery almost deafening. David raised his rifle, motioning for the group to move. "Stay close. Elias, find the core." Elias examined his laptop, the screen flickering as it interfaced with the alien systems. "This way," he said, leading them down a narrow corridor. The core chamber was massive, a cavernous space dominated by a pulsating sphere of energy suspended in midair. Tendrils of light extended from the sphere, connecting to various parts of the ship. Elias approached a nearby console, his face grim. "This is it. If I overload the core, it'll cause a chain reaction. But there's a catch." "There's always a catch," David said, scanning the room for threats. Elias hesitated. "Once I start the overload, the ship's defenses will activate. We'll have about 10 minutes before the whole thing goes up." David nodded. "Then we make those 10 minutes count." Marcus gripped his plasma blade. "I'll take care of the defenses. Just do your thing." Elias began inputting commands, his movements precise but hurried. The core's glow intensified, the tendrils retracting as the overload sequence began. An alarm sounded, a piercing wail that sent chills down their spines. The first wave of defenders arrived almost immediately, sleek, metallic drones that moved with unnerving precision. Marcus charged forward, his blade slicing through the air with lethal efficiency. David fired his rifle, each shot calculated to protect Elias. 2 minutes in, Elias called out, sweat dripping down his face. "It's working." The defenders kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Marcus fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his blade carving through the enemy ranks. David's ammunition was running low, but he held his ground, his resolve unshaken. 4 minutes, Elias shouted. The chamber shook violently as the core began to destabilize. The defenders faltered momentarily, their movements erratic. David seized the opportunity, throwing a grenade into the midst of the remaining drones. The explosion sent a shockwave through the room, buying them precious seconds. "Done!" Elias yelled, slamming the console shut. "We need to go now." The group sprinted back to the pod, the ship's internal systems collapsing around them. Lights flickered, and the hum of machinery turned into a cacophony of screeches and groans. The pod launched just as the core erupted, a blinding explosion tearing through the ship. The shockwave propelled them forward, the force nearly overwhelming the pod's integrity. On the ground, the survivors watched as the central hub disintegrated, its debris raining down like meteors. The remaining alien ships faltered, their beams flickering before going dark. For the first time since the invasion began, the city was silent. David, Elias, and Marcus emerged from the wreckage, battered but alive. They stood together, gazing at the ruined skyline. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Elias nodded, a faint smile on his face. "For now." David placed a hand on their shoulders. "It's a start, and it's more than we had yesterday." The three men turned toward the horizon, the dawn breaking over the shattered city. It wasn't a victory, but it was hope, and that was enough.